It began as a hearing that few expected to draw real heat. Jasmine Crockett stood at the defense table, steady and deliberate, prepared for the day's arguments. Across from her, Judge Clarence Thomas presided with the authority of decades on the bench. Observers in the gallery anticipated formality, perhaps tension, but nothing beyond sharp questions and careful legal fencing. But the morning turned quickly, and history caught everyone off guard. Thomas started with a pointed line of questioning, his tone sharper than usual. His words painted Jasmine as reckless, suggesting her motions before the court were frivolous attempts to embarrass powerful people. His voice carried the weight of office, each syllable edged with something closer to accusation than inquiry. The courtroom grew still, as even seasoned attorneys sensed the confrontation had shifted beyond routine legal challenge. Jasmine didn't shrink. Instead, she held Thomas's gaze and answered each question with calm precision. Her words never rose in volume, but each response underlined that her filings weren't theater. They were grounded in documents, statements, and timelines too detailed to ignore. The quiet conviction in her voice made the contrast starker. Power confronted by persistence, formality undone by facts. Slowly, attention in the gallery shifted from Thomas's authority to the clarity of Jasmine's defense. Minutes into the exchange, murmurs began at the back of the courtroom, uniformed. Officers entered quietly, breaking the expected rhythm of legal argument. Some observers leaned forward, sensing something unprecedented. As Thomas moved to interrupt Jasmine once more, an officer stepped forward, handed him a folded document, and whispered words too soft to hear. The judge's face shifted, the calm veneer slipping into visible confusion and then alarm. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, in clear, deliberate words, the officer announced that Clarence Thomas was under arrest. Gasps rose across the room. Law clerks, reporters, even other attorneys, caught between disbelief and fascination. Charges read aloud tied Thomas to undisclosed financial dealings that had surfaced only hours earlier. The news had traveled faster than the hearing itself. The law had arrived in the middle of argument. Jasmine stood motionless, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, she seemed less surprised than the rest of the room. Later reports would reveal that her team had discovered documents days before, quietly shared them with investigators, and stepped back to let the process unfold. What had seemed like courtroom theatrics was, in truth, part of a larger arc already moving behind the scenes. Thomas, it turned out, had stepped into his own undoing. The arrest itself unfolded quickly. Almost politely, Thomas, standing silent, hands clasped as the officer read his rights. But the moment shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded him for decades. In that instant, titles and robes meant little. The law treated even the highest bench as reachable. Jasmine watched, not triumphant, irresolute, her silence heavier than any speech could have been. Outside, news cameras caught fragments of reaction, disbelief, anger, and quiet satisfaction. Commentators scrambled to frame what had happened. A sitting judge confronting an attorney, only to be confronted himself by evidence too concrete to ignore. Jasmine's composure became part of the story. Her refusal to gloat or condemn on camera, a reminder that her fight had never been about spectacle. It was about accountability, and in that moment, the law had delivered it. In interviews later that day, Jasmine refused to center herself. She spoke only of process, insisting no individual is above scrutiny when facts demand answers. Her voice stayed measured, but the words landed sharply. Power must always meet proof. Viewers praised her restraint, noting how rare it felt in an era where outrage often drowns out substance. Her calm made the shock of the arrest feel even more real. The courtroom itself, once formal and predictable, became a symbol overnight. Clips of Thomas's confrontation and arrest spread worldwide, not because of shouting or chaos, but because of the profound quiet that followed. At the heart of that quiet stood Jasmine Crockett, steady, deliberate, and unshaken by power. Undone before her eyes, as the shock settled into headlines, analysts began unpacking how the confrontation had turned so suddenly. They traced it back to Jasmine's filings documents many had dismissed as unlikely to gain traction. But the details carefully assembled and quietly delivered to investigators had triggered a parallel investigation that neither Thomas nor the public had fully grasped until the moment officers walked into the courtroom. That slow, quiet strategy became part of what made the outcome so jarring. Reporters noted the contrast between Jasmine's calm presence and the chaos outside the courthouse. Crowds gathered, some in disbelief, others in celebration. But inside, she remained focused. Asked what she felt seeing Thomas in handcuffs, she paused and simply said, "Accountability matters, even when it lands on the powerful." That refusal to gloat turned public sympathy firmly toward her side. Viewers recognized someone who believed her work should speak louder than her victory. Critics tried to reframe the story, calling the arrest politically motivated or timed to damage reputations. But the facts Jasmine had uncovered: transactions undisclosed, connections concealed, and signatures linking Thomas to questionable payments stood firm against spin. Legal experts admitted the evidence seemed thorough enough to make an arrest inevitable once it surfaced. Jasmine's decision to let law enforcement act rather than demand it publicly protected the case from claims of grandstanding. In the following days, coverage moved beyond Thomas alone. Commentators asked how long the signs had been there, and why it had taken an unexpected confrontation to bring them to light. Jasmine's role was dissected not just as an attorney, but as a figure who refused to back down even when challenged by authority. Her poise under fire became a symbol for many. That standing firm doesn't always mean raising your voice, but knowing your facts and trusting them to hold. For Jasmine, the aftermath wasn't about triumph, but about what came next. She warned that arrest is only the start. Real accountability requires trials, evidence presented openly, and conclusions reached under law. Her words were careful, reminding people that justice isn't vengeance. Power doesn't disappear with one pair of handcuffs. That perspective, sober rather than celebratory, made her message resonate beyond political lines. In private, those close to her described how she'd prepared for the possibility the hearing might turn historic. Her team had checked, rechecked, and then quietly shared findings with investigators before stepping back. That patience choosing process over publicity proved key. And when Thomas confronted her in court, trying to use position as leverage, it backfired spectacularly because facts had already moved faster than his authority. Public reaction focused on the symbolism. A judge, for decades seen as untouchable, discovering the law does not bow to robes. And beside him, the image of Jasmine Crockett, composed and silent, became the story's most enduring photograph. It captured what many felt. The law, at its best, serves truth rather than power. Courage sometimes looks less like anger and more like refusing to be intimidated. Even weeks later, commentators still pointed to that moment as a turning point, not because of the volume, because of what quiet conviction achieved. Jasmine's refusal to match confrontation with outrage left Thomas confronting more than hurt, left him confronting facts he couldn't dismiss. And in that brief silence before officers moved in, the weight of those facts filled the room, more powerfully than any argument could have in the end. What people remembered wasn't just the arrest, but how it happened, quietly, unexpectedly, and in the middle of an attempt to discredit someone who refused to flinch. And at the heart of that moment stood Jasmine Crockett, proving that sometimes the sharpest rebuke to power is to let truth speak for itself, and watch even the highest walls crumble when